There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Acts. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. And here we see Festus. He gets right back to business because it says the very next day he reopens a trial against Paul. And this is actually very smart of him because with Felix, nothing happened for 2 years. But here, Festus, he doesn't want to be accused by Rome of holding any Roman citizen in custody without any charges. And so it's smart of him to try to get rid of this problem very quickly because Festus here, he didn't create the problem, he only inherited it. And for Festus, this is not the only problem he probably has. He's running everything in Judea, being the governor. Okay, so now Festus, he commands Paul to be brought in before the judgment seat. And Festus, he takes his seat as the judge. And now you got all the Jewish leaders, and they're all there. But this time they're there without their high-powered attorney, Tertullus. And so now it's the Jewish leaders who are bringing up all these empty accusations against Paul. But there's no new information. There's nothing they can prove, where there's no Roman charges of anything worth putting Paul to death for, with no evidence. And Paul's done nothing against Jewish law, nothing against the temple or against Rome. And so Festus, he should have released Paul right there. And for being a leader with such a good reputation, this was probably his only one mistake. Because Festus, he's trying to build a relationship with the Jewish leadership. And so he does want to do the Jews a favor, where it seems that every Roman governor of Judea, ever since Pontius Pilate, they always wanted to do the Jews a favor. Because this exact phrasing, these exact words have been said about each one of them, wanting to do the Jews a favor, beginning with Pilate. And then we saw it with Felix, and now we see it here with Festus. Because they imagine that this is going to make their job easier to govern them. It's going to be easy to govern them if they're happy. But they're never happy. And with all the favors, it never made the Jews any easier to govern. And that's because the Jews will always hate the Romans, because the Romans are Gentiles and they're in their land. So trying to do the Jews a favor, Festus, he asks Paul and said, "Will you go with me to Jerusalem to be tried in front of me?" We're just having a new change of venue. It would make no sense to Paul because he's already in front of him. And I'm not sure Paul realizes it here, but the only thing that's keeping Paul alive right now is being in Roman custody. The Roman guards are actually protecting him. Where literally without their protection, Paul would be killed the moment he leaves, where Paul would be ambushed. And this would happen no matter where Paul went in the Roman Empire. There would always be someone trying to kill him. But here, Paul, he isn't going to foolishly put his life into the hands of the Jews because they've already made their intentions clear that they want him killed. And so Paul here, what he does is he claims the right to every Roman citizen who thinks that they're not being treated fairly in a lower court. And so Paul, he just says, "I stand at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be judged." And then he explains of how he's done nothing wrong. And if he has done anything deserving death, he's willing to die. But you can't deliver me to these men. So this is like any one of us, how you would appeal to the Supreme Court. And that's what appealing to Caesar means. And the Caesar that Paul is specifically appealing to here is actually the Emperor Nero, who is the new Caesar. But at this time, Nero, he wasn't anti-Christian. That comes later. And so with just one little sentence where Paul says, I appeal to Caesar, this takes Paul's case out of the hands of the Jews, and it also takes his case out of the hands of Festus. And then we see here in verse 12 that Festus, he checks this out with his legal counsel, where he confirms that he has no choice but to send Paul to Caesar. And so he says, to Caesar you shall go. And so by Paul taking his case out of Festus's jurisdiction, all Festus can do here is apologize to the Jews. And he can just say, well, it's out of my hands now. I tried. But Festus is not going to go against Roman law, because he's not going to risk his own life to make the Jews happy, where he definitely does not want to go up against Nero. But now this has created a problem for Festus, because Paul still has no charges. And he doesn't want to send such a famous prisoner to Nero without any offenses he supposedly committed to go along with him, because this would make Festus look incompetent. We're being Nero's new governor of Judea and sending a prisoner to Nero with no charges, as if Caesar doesn't have enough to do running the whole Roman Empire. We're literally at this time, that's the whole known world. So Nero, he doesn't need any governors like that. He doesn't need governors who can't handle even the smallest cases. So Festus here, he's a little stuck. But it's a good thing for Uncle Festus that the rest of the Adams family, they show up, where they're a little creepy and a little spooky, and they're not really the Adams family, but they're really Herod's family, but they're just as creepy and spooky as the Adams family. And these are the last known members of Herod's family that we know of, where this is the young King Agrippa II, along with his beautiful sister Bernice. And it's more than just rumored that he's living with his sister Bernice as a wife, which infuriated the Jews. The Jews, they hated it, because incest is strictly forbidden in the Jewish law, and he's been practicing it openly. And this King Herod Agrippa II, he has the title of being the King of the Jews, or King Agrippa here. He only rules a client kingdom that's northeast of Judea. So his kingdom is up around the area of Lebanon. But Caesar has given him the title of being a king, like his father, because his father was King Herod Agrippa I. But he just has a smaller area. His father, he governed Judea and Samaria. But the emperor has also given King Agrippa II the right to oversee the affairs of the temple in Jerusalem. So he's actually the guy who's in charge of appointing the high priest to the temple in Jerusalem. So that makes King Agrippa an expert in all things Jewish and all religious matters. And this King Herod Agrippa II, he's also the last known Edomite we know of in history, which means that he's a descendant of Esau, which was Jacob's evil twin brother. So he's not Jewish, and all of his descendants were all enemies of the Jews, which also means that his sister Bernice was also an Edomite. And this beautiful sister Bernice, she was only jealous of one person in her life. And we talked about that person the last time we met. And it was her sister Drusilla, who was Felix's wife. And the reason she was jealous is because Drusilla was more beautiful than Bernice, according to Josephus, the historian, because Drusilla was stunningly beautiful. And where we read about Drusilla last time, where in the text there, it called her Jewish in the text, which means that their heritage was mixed. But you can't make any mistake here. All the Herods, they all lived like Romans. And so the Herod girls, they were beautiful. And the Herod men, they were perverts. They were all incestuous. And we've seen this all the way back from the life of their grandfather, Herod Antipas. Because if you remember, John the Baptist was imprisoned for telling their grandfather, Herod Antipas, that it was unlawful for him to have his brother Philip's wife, who just also happened to be his niece, where his niece, who he unlawfully wed, her name was Herodias, because she too was a descendant from Herod the Great, where then she had a daughter that did that erotic dance in front of Herod Antipas and his guests, which caused Herod to consent to the beheading of John the Baptist. And that was the same Herod who had mocked Jesus during Jesus' trial in front of Pilate, where Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate with that purple robe. And he's the only person that we ever heard of that Jesus wouldn't even speak to. Okay, and then King Agrippa II, his sister Bernice, they're not strangers to this city of Caesarea. And they're no strangers to the palace here where they're staying, because that was built by their great-grandfather, Herod the Great, who is the same Herod who had built the temple called Herod's Temple. Though there was already a temple there, it's just that Herod, he had made it very elaborate and very grand. And so he's the same Herod that's from the Christmas story, where the Magi, where they came from the east, where he tried to kill baby Jesus in Bethlehem by slaughtering all the male children under 2 years old. So it can be kind of tricky trying to keep track of all the Herods, and it can get a little confusing. But King Agrippa II and his sister Bernice, their father, he was King Agrippa I. And he's the one who had the Apostle James, who was the brother of the Apostle John, beheaded. And we read about him in the very beginning of the book of Acts in chapter 12, where at the end of that chapter, which is only 16 years earlier than this date, we're at this very same city in Caesarea, in this very same amphitheater. He wore that silver-threaded garment that just shimmered in the sunlight when the crowd yelled, "The voice of a God and not a man." Where Herod Agrippa I, he didn't correct them, and he fell down dead and was ate by worms. And just to let you know what happens to these guys, to Agrippa and Bernice, that this affair between them, it doesn't last. They both go on to have different relationships, where Bernice, she actually becomes the mistress of the commander Titus Vespasian. And she actually was his mistress during the time that Titus destroyed Jerusalem and along with the temple in 70 AD. Where that Titus, he eventually became the Roman emperor. But before the Senate would confirm him as the new Caesar, they made him leave Bernice because the Romans, they didn't like her. And that's when Bernice, she actually disappears from history. But back here in our story, this young couple, they do what's customary. They go and they visit the new guy in town. So they go pay their respects to the new governor. And the timing couldn't be any better for Festus and his guests, Agrippa and Bernice. For them, this wasn't a very short visit. It says they stayed for what's called many days. And so it doesn't seem like the topic of Paul came up right away.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.